The scorching Texas sun beat down on the Broken Feather Ranch like God's own judgment, the cracked earth thirsting for rain that hadn't fallen in 3 long months. But Valencia Thorne had weathered worse droughts than this. Droughts of the land and droughts of the soul. At 48, Valencia had buried more than most. Her husband, her dreams of prosperity, and a past so blood-soaked few would believe the quiet widow had lived it. All that remained was this failing patch of dirt, a weathered farmhouse, and Storm, her last milk cow, the only thing standing between her and starvation through the coming winter. The men who rode toward her property that sweltering August morning thought they'd found easy pickings. A desperate widow, alone and vulnerable, the kind of victim the lawless West created and forgot with each setting sun. What they couldn't know, what no one in Mason County could possibly suspect, was that before she was Valencia Thorne, devoted farmer's wife, she had been La Loba, the she-wolf, leader of the most feared rustling operation ever to terrorize the borderlands. And these men were about to awaken a predator who had been dormant but never truly tamed. The relentless sun had just begun its descent when Valencia spotted the dust cloud approaching from the east. She squinted against the harsh glare, her calloused hand instinctively reaching for the worn Spencer rifle that never strayed far from her side. 20 years of honest living hadn't dulled her instincts. Riders approaching at dusk rarely brought good tidings. "Storm," she called softly to the spotted milk cow grazing in the front paddock. "Might be time to get you in the barn." The cow raised her head, large brown eyes regarding Valencia with the familiarity of a companion rather than livestock. Storm represented far more than just an animal to Valencia. After Thomas died of fever last winter, the cow had become both livelihood and company in the crushing loneliness of the Broken Feather Ranch. As the riders drew closer, Valencia could make out 5 men, their horses moving with the lazy confidence of those who feared no law. Her jaw tightened. Mason County had been plagued by cattle thieves these past months. Desperate men pushed to depredation by the drought. The local rangers were stretched thin, leaving remote homesteads like hers to fend for themselves. Valencia moved Storm toward the barn, her mind calculating possibilities with a precision that had once kept her alive through ambushes and shootouts along the Rio Grande. The barn offered little security, but perhaps the approaching men merely sought water or directions. Perhaps. The lead rider pulled up 20 yards from her porch, dust billowing around his dun-colored horse. He was a tall man with a cruel set to his mouth, partially hidden beneath a sandy mustache. His clothes were tailored, but of good quality. This was no desperate farmer turned thief. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "Fine evening we're having." Valencia stood on her porch, rifle held casually, but visibly. "State your business, mister. Sun's getting low and I've chores to finish." The man smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Name's Sutton. Jackson Sutton. My associates and I are passing through collecting provisions for our journey north. Town's 12 miles west," Valencia replied evenly. "General store should have what you need." One of the other riders, a heavy-set man with a face mottled by old smallpox scars, spat into the dirt. "We ain't looking for no general store goods, woman." Sutton shot him a warning glance before turning back to Valencia with a practiced smile. "What my friend means to say is that we're in need of fresh meat for our travel. That milk cow of yours would serve nicely. We're prepared to compensate you, of course." Valencia's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her rifle. "Cow's not for sale at any price. She's my livelihood. $3 is fair," Sutton continued as if she hadn't spoken. "More than fair, considering the drought's got everyone selling stock they can't feed. As I said, she's not for sale. Now I'll thank you for moving along." The atmosphere shifted, subtle as a snake preparing to strike. Sutton's friendly demeanor hardened, his eyes cold as a West Texas winter. "Maybe I'm not making myself clear, Mrs. Thorne," Valencia supplied, her voice steady as stone. "Valencia Thorne. Mrs. Thorne. My associates and I will be taking that cow. The only choice before you is whether you accept payment and live to buy another when times improve. Or he let the threat hang in the air between them. The old Valencia, La Loba of the borderlands, would have already put a bullet through Sutton's eye for such insolence, but 20 years of civilization had taught her restraint, if not submission. 5 men against 1 woman for a single milk cow, she observed, her tone deceptively mild. Your mothers must be mighty proud. The smallpox-scarred man laughed harshly. Hear that, boys? The widow's got sand. A younger rider, barely out of his teens with a patchy attempt at a beard, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Mr. Sutton, maybe we should move on. Plenty of unguarded herds north of here. Quiet, Jenkins, Sutton snapped before turning his attention back to Valencia. Last chance, Mrs. Thorne. $3 for the cow and we'll leave you in peace. Valencia met his gaze unflinchingly. You're not taking Storm. Not for $3. Not for 30. Sutton sighed as if genuinely disappointed. Have it your way. He nodded to 2 of his men. Doyle, Reeves, secure the animal. Valencia raised her rifle. Take 1 step toward my barn and I'll put you in the ground. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Sutton laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You really think you can take all 5 of us, Mrs. Thorne? Be reasonable. Don't need to take all 5, Valencia replied calmly. Just you, Mr. Sutton. Rest of these boys strike me as followers, not leaders. Without you, they'll scatter like quail. Something in her voice, the absolute certainty, the lack of fear, made Sutton study her more carefully. For 20 years, Valencia had worked to bury La Loba beneath layers of respectability and routine. But in moments of danger, something of the old predator still showed in her eyes. Whatever Sutton saw made him hesitate, but only briefly. His pride wouldn't allow him to back down before his men. With deliberate slowness, he drew his revolver. Last warning, widow. Lower that scattergun and... The crack of Valencia's rifle split the evening air. Sutton's hat flew from his head, a neat hole punched through its crown. His horse reared in panic, nearly unseating him. That was your last warning, Valencia stated flatly. Next one goes through your skull. The teenage rider, Jenkins, had drawn his pistol reflexively, but looked more terrified than threatening. The others froze, reassessing the situation. She's bluffing, hissed the smallpox-scarred man. She can't reload that rifle before we cut her down. What he couldn't see from his position was the Colt Peacemaker partially hidden by Valencia's skirts, ready for her right hand the moment the rifle served its purpose. Sutton, however, sensed the shifting odds. He'd expected easy prey and found a scorpion instead. We'll be moving on, Mrs. Thorne, but these parts can be dangerous for a woman alone. Accidents happen. Fires start. Would be a shame if you're still on my property in 10 seconds, Mr. Sutton. The buzzards will be picking your bones clean by morning. Valencia's voice carried the absolute authority of someone accustomed to giving life or death commands. 1. Sutton's face contorted with rage. 2. Let's go, boys, Sutton finally ordered, wheeling his horse around. The cow ain't worth the trouble. Valencia continued counting steadily as they rode away, her rifle trained on Sutton's back until they disappeared over the rise. Only when the dust cloud had faded did she lower the weapon, her hands betraying the slightest tremor, not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. 20 years ago, she would have killed Sutton without hesitation and would have hunted down his men one by one through the borderlands. 20 years of trying to be something else. Someone else had changed her, but not, perhaps, as much as she'd believed. Valencia checked on Storm, stroking the cow's soft muzzle. They'll be back, she murmured. And not just for you. In the fading light, she secured the barn and returned to her cabin. From beneath the loose floorboard under her bed, she retrieved a battered tin box. Inside lay mementos of another life. A silver-plated revolver with elaborate engravings, newspaper clippings in Spanish detailing the exploits of a notorious rustling gang, and a faded daguerreotype of a much younger Valencia surrounded by hard-eyed men, her expression cold and commanding. Valencia ran her fingers over the image. She had been 28 then, at the height of her power, when the name La Loba sent chills through the borderlands. Before Thomas, before redemption, before she'd buried that life beneath the quiet existence of Valencia Thorne, respectable widow. She returned the box to its hiding place, but kept the engraved revolver. Some ghosts couldn't stay buried forever. As expected, they came that night. Not for storm this time, but for retribution. Valencia was waiting. The moment she'd seen Sutton's eyes, she'd known his type. A man whose pride wouldn't allow a woman to best him, especially publicly, before his men. He would return, and he would intend to make an example of her. The moon was a thin sliver, offering little illumination, as three riders approached from the west, using the natural dip of the land to muffle their approach. Valencia watched from the darkened window of her cabin, noting that only three had returned. Sutton, the smallpox-scarred man, and a third she recognized as Reeves, a sallow-faced man with a perpetual sneer. The Jenkins boy and the fifth man were notably absent. Perhaps the boy had found his conscience, or perhaps Sutton had decided fewer witnesses were preferable for what he planned. They dismounted 100 yards out, leaving their horses ground-tied in the scrub, an amateur's mistake. In the dry brush, any horse might spook at a sudden sound, leaving them stranded. Valencia weighed her options. She could wait in the cabin, where the log walls offered some protection, but also limited her mobility and sight lines. Or she could meet them on ground of her choosing. La Loba would never have hidden behind walls. She slipped out the back door, moving silently across the packed earth of her yard to the shadows of the barn. 20 years of honest living might have softened her body, but the drought-hardened terrain of West Texas had kept her tough. Her footfalls made less noise than a stalking cougar as she circled wide, positioning herself behind the approaching men. "Burn it all," Sutton was saying in a harsh whisper. "The barn first, then the house. Let her try to run, and we'll put her down like the she-wolf she thinks she is." The smallpox-scarred man chuckled. "Shame to waste such an opportunity, boss. Woman like that, living alone all this time, might be worth having some fun before." "Shut your mouth, Doyle," Sutton cut him off. "We're here for justice, not your perverted amusements." Justice. Valencia nearly laughed at the irony. Men like Sutton always clothed their wounded pride in nobler terms. She waited until they separated, Sutton heading for the cabin, while the others moved toward the barn with coal oil lanterns. The moment they were sufficiently distant from each other, she made her move. Reeves heard her a second too late. By the time he turned, Valencia had already pressed the muzzle of her revolver against the base of his skull. "Drop the lantern," she whispered gently. He hesitated, and she pressed harder. "Drop it, or join your ancestors." The lantern settled softly onto the dirt. Valencia relieved him of his gun with practiced efficiency. "Walk to the water trough. Hands where I can see them." Once there, she brought the butt of her revolver down on the base of his skull, hard enough to render him unconscious, but measured to avoid killing him. La Loba would have slit his throat without hesitation, but Valencia Thorne had made promises to Thomas, to herself, to God. One down, two remaining. Doyle, the smallpox-scarred man, was approaching the barn from the opposite side, lantern swinging carelessly in his hand. Valencia tracked his movements, calculating the right moment to intercept. A floorboard creaked in the cabin. Sutton was already inside. Valencia made a split-second decision. The barn and storm could be rebuilt. Her own life, once taken, was gone forever. She changed course, moving swiftly and silently toward her home. Through the window, she could make out Sutton's silhouette as he moved through her darkened living room, pistol drawn, searching for her. She considered shooting him through the glass, but dismissed the thought. Too easy for him to hear the approach, too hard to ensure a kill shot through the distorting pain. Instead, she circled to the back door she'd left slightly ajar. Sutton was now in her bedroom, rifling through her possessions, likely seeking valuables to steal after he'd finished his justice. Valencia waited, still as death, until he emerged from the bedroom. Then she stepped into the doorway, her revolver leveled at his chest. "Looking for me, Mr. Sutton?" He froze, then slowly raised his hands, his own pistol still clutched in his right. "Mrs. Thorne, seems we both misjudged the situation. Put the gun down, now. Let's be reasonable." "There's nothing reasonable about men who threaten a widow and plan to burn her home," Valencia replied, her voice as hard as the Texas bedrock. "Put the gun down." Sutton's eyes darted past her, and a slow smile spread across his face. "I don't think I will." Too late, Valencia sensed movement behind her. Something heavy struck her shoulder. Not a bullet, but the solid weight of a gun barrel. She staggered forward, maintaining her grip on her weapon, but momentarily disoriented. Doyle stood in the doorway, his damaged face twisted in triumph. "Got her, boss." Valencia recovered quickly, decades of survival instinct surging to the fore. She dropped to one knee, bringing her revolver up, but Sutton was already advancing, his own weapon now aimed squarely at her face. "That was quite a performance earlier today, Mrs. Thorne," he said with genuine appreciation in his voice. "You had me fooled, but no lone woman gets the better of Jackson Sutton twice." Valencia's mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles, assessing threats. 2 armed men, both with guns drawn, both with clear shots. Thomas would understand if she broke her vow tonight. Sometimes survival requires blood. "You know," Sutton continued conversationally, "there's something familiar about you. The way you handle yourself, the way you move." He studied her face in the dim light filtering through the windows. "What did you say your name was again?" "Valencia Thorne," she answered, watching for any distraction, any opening. "Thorne," he repeated thoughtfully. "Married to that farmer who died last winter? Thomas Thorne?" Valencia's silence was confirmation enough. "Funny thing," Sutton mused. "Knew Thomas Thorne years back. Texas Ranger. Disappeared during a mission south of the border, tracking a rustling operation. Everyone thought he was dead until he resurfaced years later, retired to a quiet life of farming." His eyes narrowed. Imagine that. The implications hung in the air between them. If Sutton knew Thomas had been a ranger, he might well know other details, including who Thomas had been hunting when he disappeared. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Sutton?" Valencia asked, playing for time as she assessed her dwindling options. "I'm suggesting, Mrs. Thorne, that perhaps your husband brought back more than just himself from Mexico." Sutton's smile widened. "I've heard stories about a woman down there they called La Loba, the she-wolf. Ran the most efficient rustling operation the borderlands had ever seen. Dozens of men under her command, thousands of heads of cattle moved north. Rangers, federales, bounty hunters, all failed to catch her." Valencia kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. No one in Mason County knew that history. She and Thomas had been careful, starting fresh where no one knew their pasts. "Interesting story," she replied evenly. "What happened to this she-wolf?" "Vanished," Sutton said. "About the same time Ranger Thorne reappeared. Some say he killed her. Others say—" He studied her face intently. "Others say she was clever enough to realize the game was changing, that the frontier was closing, that perhaps she'd made enough money to disappear." "Start fresh," Doyle shifted impatiently. "What's this got to do with anything, boss? Let's just finish her and take the cow." "Patience, Doyle," Sutton chided, never taking his eyes off Valencia. "I'm just trying to understand who exactly we're dealing with." His smile turned predatory. "Because if my suspicions are correct, we may have stumbled onto something far more valuable than a milk cow." Valencia remained silent, calculating. The revelation that Sutton might know or suspect her true identity changed everything. This was no longer about a stolen cow or wounded pride. If word spread about who she had been, everything she and Thomas had built would crumble. There were still bounties on La Loba's head in 3 states and 2 countries. More importantly, there were old enemies who would cross oceans to find her if they knew she was alive. "You've got quite an imagination, Mr. Sutton," she finally said. "But I'm just a widow trying to survive." "We'll see." Sutton gestured with his pistol. "On your feet. We're going to have a longer conversation somewhere more private. Then you'll tell me exactly who you are and where you've hidden your money." La Loba wouldn't have walked away empty-handed. As Valencia slowly rose, a sound outside caught their attention. The distinctive pump of a shotgun being readied. "That's far enough, gentlemen." A new voice, authoritative and calm, came from beyond the open door. "Lower your weapons and step away from Mrs. Thorne." Sheriff Abernathy stood silhouetted in the doorway, the twin barrels of his shotgun unwavering. Sutton's face twisted in fury and surprise. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. Private dispute. Breaking into a widow's home in the dead of night seems mighty public to me." Abernathy's weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes were hard. "Weapons down. Now." For a tense moment, Valencia thought Sutton might risk it, but survival instinct won out. He slowly lowered his pistol. Doyle, however, was slower to comply. His eyes darted between the sheriff and Valencia, the lantern light catching the pockmarks on his face, making them appear deeper, more sinister. "Doyle," Sutton warned, reading his companion's intent. "Don't." Too late. Doyle swung his weapon toward Abernathy. 2 shots rang out simultaneously, the sheriff's shotgun and Valencia's revolver. Doyle crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Sutton dropped his own weapon entirely, hands raised high. "Didn't have to end this way," Abernathy said grimly, keeping his shotgun trained on Sutton. "Mrs. Thorne, are you all right?" Valencia nodded, lowering her revolver. "I am now, Sheriff. Thank you for your timely arrival." "Thank your cow," Abernathy replied with the ghost of a smile. "Spotted her wandering loose near the road. Figured something must be wrong for you to leave your gate open." Storm. In the commotion, the cow must have pushed through the unlatched barn door. Valencia's eyes stung unexpectedly. The very animal Sutton had come to steal had inadvertently saved her. As Abernathy secured Sutton with handcuffs, the outlaw's eyes remained fixed on Valencia, calculation and suspicion evident in his gaze. "This isn't over," he murmured as the sheriff led him past her. "I know who you are, and once word spreads—" "That's enough out of you." Abernathy cut him off, giving him a none too gentle shove toward the door. Valencia watched them go, Sutton's threat echoing in her mind. After the sheriff departed with his prisoner and Doyle's body, she stood alone in her cabin, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving her drained. She returned to the bedroom and once again retrieved the tin box from beneath the floorboards. The revolver inside gleamed in the lantern light, its silver engravings telling a story few would believe. The story of a woman who had ruled the borderlands with cunning and iron will. La Loba had been many things: ruthless, calculating, feared, but never naive. Sutton was right about one thing: this wasn't over. Once word spread of his suspicions, others would come. Lawmen seeking old bounties, former rivals seeking revenge, treasure hunters seeking the fortune La Loba was rumored to have hidden. The peaceful life she had built with Thomas, the quiet existence she had maintained after his death, all of it balanced now on the fragile thread of a secret 2 decades old. Valencia closed the box, but didn't return it to its hiding place. Instead, she began gathering essentials: food, ammunition, clothing. By dawn, she would need to be gone, at least temporarily. She needed information, needed to know how much Sutton actually knew and who he might have already told. Most of all, she needed to contact the only people who might still be loyal to La Loba after all these years. As she worked, Valencia's movements became more fluid, more purposeful. The careful facade of Valencia Thorne, respectable widow, gradually fell away, revealing glimpses of the woman she had once been. The woman who had commanded dozens of loyal rustlers, outsmarted the finest trackers of 2 nations, and built an empire in the lawless borderlands. La Loba was awakening, and God help anyone who threatened what was hers. The dawn painted the horizon in shades of crimson and gold as Valencia Thorne rode away from the only home she'd known for 20 years. Storm plodding steadily behind her, tethered to Valencia's aging mare. She hadn't bothered trying to sell the ranch or secure her few possessions. Some things mattered more than others when your past came hunting. Sheriff Abernathy had locked up Jackson Sutton on charges of breaking and entering, attempted murder, and conspiracy, enough to hold him for at least a few days. But iron bars wouldn't contain the suspicions Sutton had voiced. Words had a way of slipping through, finding ears hungry for gossip or opportunity. La Loba had a $5,000 bounty on her head in Texas alone, dead or alive. As the sun climbed higher, Valencia turned her mare south toward Cottonwood Creek, a nondescript waterway that marked the unofficial boundary between civilization and the true wilderness of the borderlands. She knew this route by heart, though she hadn't traveled it in decades. Some paths remain etched in memory, no matter how one tries to forget. By midday, she reached a weathered line shack nestled in a stand of cottonwoods. The structure seemed abandoned, its roof partially collapsed, windows long since shattered by storms or vandals. Valencia dismounted, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle. Another reminder that she was no longer the young woman who had once ridden for days without rest. She secured the animals and approached the cabin cautiously, hand resting on her revolver. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, groaning as she pushed it open. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light penetrating the damaged roof. The cabin appeared empty except for a broken table and the remnants of a cast-iron stove. Valencia moved to the back wall, counting boards from the corner. When she reached the 7th plank, she knelt and pressed firmly on its lower edge. The board pivoted smoothly, revealing a hidden compartment. At least some things remain dependable, she murmured, reaching inside. Her fingers found a small oilskin package. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a tarnished silver medallion on a leather cord, its surface etched with an intricate wolf design. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper, the creases so deep they had nearly split the material. Valencia studied the medallion, memories flooding back. She had commissioned one for each of her top lieutenants, a symbol of belonging, of loyalty, of family. "Never thought I'd wear this again," she said to the empty room, slipping the cord around her neck and tucking the medallion beneath her shirt. She unfolded the paper, a hand-drawn map marked with locations only she and her inner circle would recognize, landmarks that wouldn't appear on any official chart, meeting points established long ago for emergencies such as this. The nearest was less than a day's ride away, a natural rock formation locals called the Devil's Throne. Whether anyone would still honor the old protocols after 20 years remained to be seen. But Valencia had few alternatives. If word of La Loba's resurrection was spreading, she needed intelligence, resources, and possibly protection, none of which Valencia Thorne, respectable widow, could access. But La Loba could. She replaced the loose board and left the cabin, continuing south. As she rode, Valencia's posture gradually changed, her back straightening, chin lifting, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, noting details most would miss. Disturbed brush suggesting recent passage, the flight patterns of birds indicating whether other riders might be nearby. These weren't conscious actions. They were the ingrained habits of someone who had survived in a world where inattention meant death. By late afternoon, she spotted the distinctive rock formation rising from the dusty landscape. A natural throne indeed, with a tall spire resembling a backrest and flat stones forming a seat large enough for several men. Valencia approached cautiously, tethering her horse and Storm in a sheltered gully before climbing a ridge that offered a clear view of the formation. For an hour she watched, ensuring no ambush awaited. Then, taking the silver medallion from beneath her shirt, she positioned herself where the setting sun would catch the metal, sending brief flashes of light visible for miles. An old signal, one her people would recognize if any still lived, if any still watched, if any still considered themselves hers. As darkness settled over the land, Valencia made a small sheltered camp in the gully, positioning herself to see anyone approaching while remaining hidden. She allowed herself only the briefest of fires to heat coffee, then extinguished it completely. The night was mild enough to manage without its warmth or comfort. Sleep came in fragments, her body remembering how to rest while remaining alert to danger. Near midnight, she woke fully, hand already on her revolver, senses straining to identify what had disturbed her. A soft whistle carried through the darkness, 3 notes rising in pitch, then 2 descending. A nightbird's call, but no natural bird would produce that precise pattern. Valencia remained motionless, waiting. The signal came again, closer now. She replied with a single low whistle. The response only La Loba would know. Minutes later, a shadow detached itself from the greater darkness. A man moved with careful deliberation down the slope toward her position, his silhouette familiar, despite the passing years. "Never thought I'd see that signal again," he said, his voice carrying the rough texture of desert winds and too much whiskey. "Figured you to be dead all these years, Val." "Hello, Nathaniel." Her voice betrayed no emotion, though seeing him stirred conflicting feelings. Gratitude that someone had answered her call. Wariness about his current allegiances. Nathaniel Tucker had been her second in command, her most trusted lieutenant. A man who had killed for her, stolen for her, would have died for her, until she disappeared, leaving him and the others to fend for themselves when the operation crumbled without her guidance. He crouched several yards away, still cautious. In the faint moonlight, she could make out the changes 20 years had wrought. Gray streaking his once black hair, deep lines etched around his eyes, a scar running from his right temple to his jaw that hadn't been there before. "Need to see it," he said flatly. Valencia reached slowly into her shirt and withdrew the medallion, letting it catch what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. Nathaniel nodded once, then reached into his own collar, producing an identical talisman. "Still carry it. Some habits die hard. Some loyalties too, it seems." A bark of laughter escaped him. "Loyalty? Is that what you call it after all this time?" He shook his head. "I'm here out of curiosity, Val. Nothing more." "Fair enough." She gestured to the space beside her. "Join me anyway, for old time's sake." After a moment's hesitation, Nathaniel settled himself cross-legged on the ground, maintaining a careful distance. 20 years, Val. Not a word. Most figured the Rangers finally got you. Others thought you'd take the money and run to California or maybe back east. It's a long story. I've got time." Valencia studied him in the darkness, weighing how much to reveal. Trust had to be earned anew. Too much had happened. Too many years had passed. "Thomas Thorne," she began, watching for his reaction. "Texas Ranger." Nathaniel's face hardened instantly. "The one who infiltrated us? Claimed to be a horse trader from Kansas." "The same. Timing always seems suspicious. You disappeared, so did he." "He caught me," Valencia admitted. "Had me dead to rights. Could have collected the bounty, made captain on the reward alone. But he didn't." The memory surfaced with surprising clarity. Thomas, revolver aimed at her heart, his blue eyes troubled as he listened to her explain why she'd built her operation, how she'd protected her people, the code she enforced even among thieves. He made a different choice. Nathaniel waited, silent, for her to continue. "Offered me a deal. Walk away from the operation, from the life. Start fresh somewhere far from the border. In exchange, he'd report me dead, killed in a shootout. No one would come looking." "And you agreed?" Disbelief colored Nathaniel's voice. "Just like that? Abandoned everything you built? Everyone who depended on you?" The accusation stung, though she'd anticipated it. "You all had your shares, enough to start new lives if you chose. Money wasn't the point, Val. We were a family. You were our—" He seemed to search for the right word. "Mother wolf," Valencia suggested, a hint of irony in her tone. "Leader," Nathaniel corrected firmly. "The only one many of us ever truly respected." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past settling between them. Why did you really agree to his deal? Nathaniel finally asked. The Val I knew would have put a bullet in that ranger and disappeared across the border? Valencia considered the question, one she'd asked herself many times over the years. I was tired, she admitted. Tired of running. Tired of violence. The operation was growing too large, attracting too much attention. The frontier was changing. Law was coming whether we liked it or not. So you surrendered. I survived, she countered. Adapted. Found a different life. Nathaniel made a non-committal sound. And the ranger? Thorn? What happened to him in this new life of yours? I married him. Valencia delivered the statement plainly, watching Nathaniel's reaction. His surprise was evident even in the darkness. You married the man sent to hunt you down? Stockholm Syndrome, Val? She laughed softly. Nothing so dramatic. We traveled together after leaving the border. Weeks on the trail. Just the two of us. Came to an understanding. He saw more in me than just La Loba. I saw more in him than just a ranger. Touching, Nathaniel commented, sarcasm evident. And now he's what? Decided to turn you in after all? He's dead, Valencia replied flatly. Fever took him last winter. Nathaniel fell silent, perhaps recognizing genuine grief in her voice. When he spoke again, his tone was marginally softer. So why the signal, Val? Why now, after all this time? A man named Jackson Sutton. Him and his gang tried to steal my cow yesterday. Nathaniel's eyebrows rose. You signaled your old lieutenants because someone tried to rustle a single cow? Times have changed indeed. It's not about the cow. Valencia leaned forward slightly. Sutton recognized me, or suspects at least. Knew things about La Loba, about Thomas's ranger work. Said once word spreads, understanding dawned in Nathaniel's eyes. Bounty hunters, old enemies. Valencia nodded. I need information. Need to know who else might remember, who might care after all this time. Need to know if I should run or stand and fight. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. What makes you think I'd help you after you abandoned us? Because you answered the signal, she replied simply. Because you kept the medallion. Because whatever happened 20 years ago, we were family once. He looked away, his profile harsh in the faint moonlight. Most are gone now. Miguel died in a shootout with Rangers 5 years after you left. Carlos drank himself to death in El Paso. Esther married a rancher near Tucson. Has grandchildren now. The names brought faces to Valencia's mind, people who had ridden with her.